Hello and welcome back to yet another lesson in the Python short course. Today we're going to focus on quite an exciting concept in programming, and that is Python modules. With that said, let's have a look at the objectives for today's lesson. First, we'll define Python modules and discuss exactly why they are so useful. Next, we'll move on to yet another practical demonstration where we'll build our own modules from scratch. So, what exactly are Python modules? How do they work and why are they so useful? Well, in essence, one can think of a Python module as a standalone script which contains Python definitions as well as statements. Now, what exactly are the benefits of deploying Python modules? Well, the first is that they allow for code reusability, which means you can develop small packages of code that can be deployed over and over and over again. The next is that they are simple and easy to use. Modules focus on a small portion of the problem rather than focusing on the entire problem when approaching your script. The final benefit is that they allow for scoping, which implies that a separate namespace is defined by a module that helps to avoid collision between various identifiers. Here is a simple example of how the time module works. Now, the time module is actually a predefined and built-in module in Python and can be called straight from the IDE without having to create the specific module from scratch. First, we use the import statement, which imports the time module into our IDE or our environment. We then call time.sleep and specify a parameter of 5. This essentially means that time.sleep is going to wait 5 seconds before the script continues to run and write the print hello world statement. And that's all the script basically does. It delays the printing of hello world by 5 seconds before this line of code is actually executed. To make more sense of modules, I think it's time for practical demonstration. So without further ado, let's dive right in. Now that I've hopped into my PyCharm environment and I've created a lesson 7 folder structure, I'm going to dive right in and I'm going to write some basic code to demonstrate exactly how modules work. The first thing we have to do when working with modules is that we have to import the package or the module or the library, if you will. So what I'll do is I'll simply call the import keyword over here, and this is going to import this module so that we can work with it. So I'll simply say import time because I want to work with the time module, and I'll do something like time dot sleep. So I'm accessing the sleep function through the time module, and I'm going to say delay the script by 3 seconds. And over here, I'll simply just do something like print, and I'll say hello there. And if we run our code now, you'll notice that our output is not quite evident, but after 3 seconds, we get the output hello there. I'll update this to 5 seconds so that we can actually see the effect. So notice as 5 seconds pass, the output should print. There we go. So if I removed the import statement over here, immediately Python is going to complain and mention or note that I've called this thing called time, but this doesn't exist in my environment. So if I run this now, I'll receive an error that says name time is not defined. But if I bring this back into my environment, the error is resolved. And let's just test this one more time. Excellent. Now, if your PC or your system or your laptop might be a little slow, you might not exactly see this effect happening. You might be thinking, oh, my system is just slow and therefore the code is not loading. But to prove that this actually works, I'm going to remove all of this over here. And I'm first going to print hello there. And then I'm going to time.sleep. And I'm going to give this a parameter of 5 seconds. Notice that this does also accept floating numbers. Let's maybe just zoom in a little more. So increase the font size. There we go. And now I'll create a new statement at the bottom over here that says print 5 seconds later. And then below this, one more print statement that says hello again. So let's see what exactly we expect to have happen here. So first we'll print hello there, then we'll wait for 5 seconds, which means we'll essentially delay the subsequent scripts, and then after 5 seconds, these scripts will run over here. So if I run this code now, let's also clear up our IDE. We receive hello there, 5-second delay, and there you go. So we can actually verify that this does indeed work. Let's try something different. Let's work with a different module. And this too is a built-in module in Python. This one is called random. And all I'm going to do here is just simply randomize a number between a range. So I'm going to generate a random number between a given range. And I'll simply say print random dot rand int, because we do want to randomize between an integer. And I'm going to pass in the required parameters. Notice that this requires 2 parameters, a and b, 2 numbers, the lower range number as well as the upper range number. So I'll simply say 0, comma, and then I'll add 10 as my second parameter. So I'll clear my console once again. And now if I hit play over here, we should receive a random number. And here we have a number of 3. So I'll randomize again. We have 0. So we can also note that the randomization includes the lower range and the upper range. That is to say 0 and 10 respectively. So I can keep running this and it will essentially just randomize any number between 0 and 10. The output will sometimes be a duplicate, but the case remains that the numbers are being randomized. Great. So that's how we can actually work with predefined modules in Python. But what if we wanted to build our own modules? How exactly would we go about doing this? Well, believe it or not, this process is actually extremely easy in Python. So what I'll do is I'll remove all of this over here and I'm going to create a new script. I'm going to create a script called area of shapes. To do this, I'm simply going to right click over here. I'll say new. And I'll look for the Python file option. I'll click on that. And then I'm going to give the script a name. And I'm going to call the script area of shapes. And this might be familiar to you because we covered a previous lesson where we created a function to determine the area of a rectangle. So I'll say Python file and I'll hit enter. So now you'll notice that my new script has been created. And what I'll do now is I'll start scripting out my code. But before I do that, what I want you to note is that I'm going to create 2 functions within this module. Much like we had the random module that had its own functions and the time module, which also had its own functions, this module is going to have customized functions that we've created. And the first one is going to be the one that we actually worked with previously, and that is to determine the area of a rectangle. So this code might look familiar to you. All we've done was we've defined a function over here where we supply the length and the width. We then multiply that, set that equal to the area, and we print the area out. Next, I'll create a new function over here and I'll actually just copy this code. I'll comment, I'll paste that over here and I'll change rectangle to square. So this is just to document that this function calculates the area of a square. I'll say define calculate area square, which is a bit lengthy. And this is going to take in one parameter, which is a. Now, if we hopped over to our trusty friend Google to determine the formula for the area of a square, you'll notice that it is essentially just, in this case at least, a equals a squared. So any given side of our square squared. So if a were to be equal to 2, then the formula would be 2 times 2. So therefore, we only need one parameter and not 2, which is the case with a rectangle. I hope this makes sense. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to complete the code for the remainder of this function over here. So I'll simply say area is equal to a multiplied by a, and then I'll simply just print that result out over here. So I'm going to print area. Remember that these variables are locally scoped. Notice the squiggly line over here. That is because we need to add a colon and make sure that our indentation is correct. Great, and that is it. That is all we basically need for this code to work. So I'll save the script now, and I'll clear all of this. And I want you to take note of something. If I go ahead and I say print, let's say hello world, the good old legendary hello world, and I run the script as is, notice that I don't really get an output. And that is simply because if you have a look over here, the script that we are targeting to be run is this main script, and this script has nothing in its body. So we actually have to go ahead and change this to point to this script. So I'll click on this, I'll say current file, and now that points to area of shapes. And if I run this now, I get the output hello world. But we are not really going to be working directly with this script. I want you to think of this script as a package, a box, a library, a module that holds both of these functions, but these functions should be callable in other scripts, much like the time and the random modules that we worked with. So what I'll do is I'll create a new script once again. I'll say new Python file, and I'll simply call this main2. You can call it whatever you like. And I'll click on enter. And then I'll make sure that I'm pointing to this current script over here. So let's make sure we've got current file, and we can test this just to make sure that we are indeed within this environment. So I'll say hello world. Let's clear our console. And there we go. So we can assume everything is working just fine. So the next step now is to make sure that we are going to call the import statement first, and I'll say import area of shapes. This is the awesome thing about PyCharm, is that the autocomplete functionality will actually pick this up. So I'll say area of shapes, and then I'll call area of shapes dot calculate the area of a rectangle, and I'll say 10 by 20. And if you're wondering why we've got dot calculate area rect, that is simply because we are dialing into the script, which is area of shapes, dot call the function name. This is quite important. And I'll just clear my console over here, run the script, and we can see that this works just fine. If I change this and I said area of shapes dot calculate the area of a square, and let's go with 5, and I run this code now, I have the output of 25 here at the bottom. So one last thing I want to show you when it comes to working with modules. Notice that this module name is quite lengthy, right? And this was done on purpose to show you how we can actually shorten this by referencing this and shortening the length of the actual module that we are importing so that we can reference it throughout our script. So I'll say as over here, and this is all it takes. I'll say as shapes, and then I'll replace what we have over here with just shapes. And this is going to do the exact same thing. I'll clear my console, run my code, and my output is still valid. The reason we do this is so that we can keep track of our code and so that we can develop more lean code. And this is important when it comes to programming, regardless of the language. If you are in a position to make your code more lean and user-friendly and more readable, then you should always opt for that approach. The other thing that's worth noting here is that there's no way for me to replicate this in our cloud environment. What exactly do I mean by this? Well, if we have a look at our sandbox cloud tool that we've been using as an alternative to PyCharm, I have NumPy over here, but there's no option for me to go ahead and create a new script. So that is why I mentioned very early on in this course that it's all good and well to play around with cloud platforms to test your code and just run some basic code. But if you are going to be working in a production environment, it's always better to have something like PyCharm on hand so that you can actually create these files on your local machine and work with them in terms of getting that full functionality out of Python. So what exactly have we learned in today's lesson? Well, we've learned that Python has built-in modules that we can easily use and deploy. We also learned how to create our own modules and create more lean code. In our next lesson, we are going to work with Python lists, which is also a very, very important component of programming in Python. So for all of that and more, I'll see you soon. Cheers.